Hello everyone, my name is Michael Brooks. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Sullivan County Legislature, and on behalf of our Chairman, Robert Doherty, and the rest of the Sullivan County Legislature, welcome for joining us for today's Town Hall. With us is Josh Potosek, our County Manager, our Director of Public Health, Nancy McGraw, and our guest today is Simmie Williams, the Chief of Police of the Town of Fallsburg. And today we're going to start with Simmie. Welcome, Simmie. And he's got a few things he would like to share with us and a few statements. So welcome today.
I thank you. I want to thank our chairman and our legislator for inviting me here today to speak. I'm immensely proud being the African-American police chief for the town of Fallsburg Police Department. But I'm one of many shades that make up our colorful and inclusive community. My background adds a unique experience to the job that cannot be taught or trained for. It's simply who I am. It's added value that helps me assess every situation as a private citizen and when I police. What I tried to do over my 28 years, but the last 10 or 11 being chief, when I come in the morning and the officers are speaking about the calls that they've gone on, I try to remind them that every call has a story. And since I've been here the longest, they'll tell me what person was involved, and I will say, okay, I know that person, I knew their mother, I knew their father, this could be the reason, that could be the reason, and they start to understand more of why they went out on that call, how they handled the call, how they could probably handle it better in the future, thanks to me just giving them a little of the backstory. So by me being here, living here all of my life, I think that's a great benefit to me doing my job as the chief of police. But I did sign up to protect the community that encompasses every resident, black, white, Latino, every resident in the town of Fallsburg. I'm a black man in a position of power, so I have to use my voice for those less likely to be heard. That's why I decided to come here today. And I think 2 weeks ago there was a protest in South Fallsburg, and I advised all of the protesters that, hey, listen, wherever you live, I'm open to having a discussion with you about police brutality, about racism. I may not have all the knowledge, but I'm very comfortable having the conversation. So I'm here to say I support all of law enforcement in Sullivan County. You don't have to live in the town of Fallsburg, but if you got a question, my door is open, my phone, I will answer, and we can just sit down and have that conversation. Because that's what we need to do right now, is converse, to talk, to listen to each other, and that's how we're going to get through this. What's beautiful about the town of Fallsburg is that it's a melting pot of many religions, race, and culture. This is what I grew up learning. I've lived here all my life. And by being here and seeing and growing up with all the people that helped raise me, that's made me give this extra effort now that I am the police chief to make sure that this community thrives. And we should be an example for what is the right thing to do instead of what might be going on in other departments. There is a deep racism embedded in our nation today, and certain rhetoric is uncovering it. Hopefully and peacefully, we can enact a great change that is needed. Institutional and systematic racism go way beyond the criminal justice system, but the police, we are in the spotlight right now. The focus is on us. So for the Black Lives Matter protesters, they're trying to show and educate many that some systems were created without concerns or the lack of concerns for black lives. Without proper education and going over history, we're bound to repeat it. So I just want to say that we want all of the protests and hard work that was done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to not be in vain. Lives were lost, and people feel that we've made very little progress. So I say today, we change, we try to change, we talk about change, and we get it to where everybody does matter. I did some research, and I've been watching and listening to a lot of people who talk, and Banksy, he's an anonymous England-based street artist. He described it as this. I'm going to use some of his words, but I'm going to add a little bit of my own in there. People of color are being failed by the system, like a broken pipe flooding the apartment of the people living downstairs. The faulty system is making their life a misery, but it's not our job to fix it. They can't. No one will let them in the apartment upstairs or even acknowledge that there's a leak upstairs. After so much misery, you want to go upstairs and just kick the door in. And I think that's how the protesters feel right now. They're in misery and they want to just kick this door in. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to just get a little bit off my chest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have a few questions for Simmie a little later on during our Q&A, and like I said, we welcome Simmie here, and it's important to remember the framework that we have here in our country to make the change. And you know, history hasn't always been kind to so many people, but there's a lot about history that was extremely positive. And fortunately, we have a system here in our country where protests can happen and people can be heard and changes can happen. Sometimes it takes a little longer than we like, but change will happen, can happen. And with that being said, we're going to get to our Q&A. And as we always do, we're going to start off with Nancy. And the question, what are the latest figures, confirmed cases, people currently hospitalized, people currently recovered, people who have died, and how many tested? Welcome, Nancy.
Good afternoon. We didn't have any new cases over the weekend, so that's very good news. Our numbers are all looking better. They keep going down. We have 87 active cases as of today, 3,048 off of isolation, 360 in mandatory quarantine. 47 individuals have passed away, unfortunately. We're down to only 6 people hospitalized at Catskill Regional Medical Center. There's an additional 6 people in other hospitals who are county residents outside the area, so that's a total of 12, but we're tracking on our dashboard the hospitalizations at Catskill, and we want to keep it consistent. 1,404 confirmed, meaning only 1 new case today, and again, none over the weekend. 10,974 individuals have been tested so far to date.
Thank you, Nancy. And next question is also for you, and it reads, has there been a spike in suicides since the pandemic? And where can someone get help during these times of virtual visits? Nancy?
So last week we talked about the number of overdoses increasing and almost doubling from March through June compared to more recently. When we look up the data on suicides, there is a website called New York State Health Connector. They have a dashboard that really lists suicide rates and compares counties to other counties and to statewide. The most recent data is from 2015 to 17. There's usually at least a 2-year lag in the data collection. And in those 3 years, 2015 to 2017, I don't know if it's inclusive of 2017, but there were 31 deaths due to suicide documented. Now, if you look at our county in comparison to surrounding counties, our rate is not that high. It is per population, but the rate is really in the second lowest percentile. in the state in terms of the suicide rate. Now, overdose deaths are not necessarily tracked or counted as suicides. It really depends on the circumstances and how that data is collected. And I don't know that we can necessarily make that connection between the two, but nevertheless, it is something to be concerned about given the 105 overdoses so far this year through June 11th, and 10 of those being fatal. So it really speaks to the need for mental health support and addiction treatment services. There is the mental health support line that anyone can call, as well as the public health information line for getting help for addiction services. And that number is 866-832-5575. And the mental health support line will repeat at the end. I think I will come back on and give it to you. You can also find it on the State Health Department's website. And it's free and confidential.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, we have a few questions for our guest today, Simmie Williams. And these next couple questions, I'm going to group them together because there's a common theme that runs through them about enforcement and compliance. So I'll read both questions and then I'll turn it over to the chief. Now that the state has closed summer sleepaway camps, how do you plan on enforcing this mandate within your community? And how do you tell the difference between a camp or a bungalow colony? The second piece to this is Governor Cuomo has emphasized that local governments need to enforce compliance with the guidelines of the reopening plan. How will Sullivan County do this? Will there be a formal plan to enforce compliance within the guidelines? Or will it be based on responding to complaints or when law enforcement officials spot noncompliance? Simmie, if you could answer those with respect to your purview.
Yes. First of all, the difference, I leave that up to my code enforcement office. They tell us the difference between a camp and a bungalow colony. But what many residents in the town of Fallsburg might see is that many of these camps are open. And what they've done, they've applied to the Department of Health to have their residency changed temporarily to these summer camps. So a lot of the summer camps will be open because they're going to be people temporarily living there. What we do and what we have done in the town of Fallsburg, we have made up signs in various languages that my officers have carried around throughout the entire Fallsburg, and we've asked people to wear masks, to practice social distancing, and I call it stop and remind, because that's what we're going to have to do all summer. We see it, we're going to have to, remind store owners, remind people. The town of Fallsburg is 100 square miles, so we have our work cut out for us. And I tell my officers, rah, rah, give me 3 good months, we'll get through this. But that's what it's all about. Just a constant reminder that we are still in the middle of this pandemic, and we just need to keep each other safe.
Thank you. We have another question for Chief Williams. If I see masks not being worn or social distancing not being followed in a business, what should I do?
So based on the governor's order, it's up to the store owner, the property owner, the business owner to call the police if someone is not wearing a mask. Then it's our job to go out there and to correct that situation. But private citizens right now really can't complain about a store or a business. It has to be the owner of that business who calls the police. But we will still take the phone calls if you see that there's a group of people not wearing masks in a business. And again, my guys, we go there, we stop and remind. But until the governor changes his order, we will go out and remind people. It's about safety, it's about saving lives. Put on the mask, practice the social distancing, And we'll get through this, people. We just will do this one day at a time.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is for Nancy. Do county officials believe we have flattened the curve, or should we still be worried? Nancy?
So yes, we have statewide successfully flattened the curve, and what that means is that the number of new infections has gone way down, and the number of hospitalizations have gone way down due to COVID-19. That is really a reflection of a number of things, of people staying at home on quarantine and isolation if they test positive, people limiting the number of trips out when the number of cases were getting very high, practicing hand washing, wearing face masks, and social distancing. So we want to stay vigilant, and as we start to reopen, to continue to do those things so that we can keep those number of new cases and the number of hospitalizations down as low as it is now, which is very good news. So we need to remain vigilant and continue to practice these prevention measures, and that's what will help keep any resurgence or uptick in the virus at bay.
Thank you, Nancy. And we're going to finish out with a few questions today with our county manager, Josh Potosik. First question, what do county leaders think is the biggest challenge we're facing? Josh, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. I think it's a great question. I think there's two main issues, and Simmie spoke very eloquently about some of the issues he's seeing on education and reminding people. But I think complacency from a pandemic perspective, Nancy talked about flattening the curve, but it's been approximately 3 months, which almost feels like 3 years, but we can't let up at this point and see some of the reversals you're seeing in some of our other big states in the South and West. We definitely don't want to be returning and going backwards in the phased reopening. So I think just being diligent and washing your hands, wearing a mask, social distancing where you can is going to be huge in the next couple months, so we keep a lid on this pandemic. And secondarily, I think we've talked about a little bit of just county finances, municipal finances in New York State and across the country are not great. They're pretty bleak. We're obviously one of our major revenue sources outside of property taxes, the sales tax. Our last 4 collections have collectively down 30%, roughly 40%, 30%, and the sales tax payment we just received was down 58% year over year. Obviously, we generate a couple $1 million from the casino and mitigation funds. Every month that is closed is a loss of between $200,000 and $250,000 a month. But I think so those are some of the knowns. 2 of the biggest variables that we don't have any direction on or formal direction on are potential state aid cuts that Governor Cuomo has pretty much daily repeated that he is looking at a potential 20% reduction in state aid across the board. That would affect not just county governments, but school districts, hospitals that receive Medicaid. $20 million or 20% cut in state aid for us is about $5 million. And then obviously there's been a lot of talk about another round of federal stimulus in Washington. There's been a couple bills proposed in the House, but nothing formal. There's talk even from the president's office that they are open to another stimulus. So we are hopeful that that stimulus can help offset some of these draconian cuts that we would have to make in the face of some of these revenue losses. The legislature was fiscally prudent a couple months ago and made about $6 million of cuts to kind of offset this. We hope that's going to put a big dent in what we have to do, and we've recently been talking about some reorganizational restructuring that could save some money too. So I think complacency, again, just to reiterate, and making sure that people continue to do what they've been doing for 3 months that have gotten to us where we are, and just county finances are probably the 2 biggest issues we're facing right now.
Thank you, Josh. Next question is also for Josh. When do we enter phase 3, and what opens or happens then?
Phase 3, assuming our metrics in the region, in the Mid-Hudson region, trend in the direction they are, would be June 23rd. Two major categories of businesses that can reopen. Restaurants, food services, while they are allowed curbside now, would be able to open up indoor dining no more than 50% capacity. And personal care businesses, not hair salons or barbers, that already have been allowed to open, but things such as nail services, tattoo parlors, spas, massage therapy. If you have specific questions about what your business specifically, the New York Ford website or the Empire State Development has some pretty detailed guidelines on who can open and guidelines on how you have to conduct your business, both for employees and customers, on their web pages.
Okay, and the last question to Josh. Will Fort Delaware reopen, and if so, when?
Yeah, obviously, the Fort Delaware, a pretty important piece of our overall park system, kind of working with our parks director, has always been in our phase, probably the last phase for reopening for our parks. We've opened up some of our parks that don't have as much density. Lake Superior is open for boating, no lifeguards yet, but Fort Delaware is a little bit more difficult just because of the nature of that business. I think we probably could once we hit phase 4, but I think, like everyone, trying to attract staff in the middle of July might be a little bit difficult this season. So while we're optimistic we can, we're not going to represent that we're confident that that can open this summer.
Thank you, Josh. And that does it for the questions and answers today. I want to thank our Public Health Director, Nancy McGraw, for joining us today, and our County Manager, Josh Potosik, and our special guest, the Chief of Police of the Town of Fallsburg, Simmie Williams. Thank you. And once again, I just want to remind people about the census. We had Saray here at our last town hall meeting talking about it. Please, if you haven't done so, please fill out the census or send in your information. And I want to thank everyone for your patience today. We were a little delayed in getting this started, but thank you for joining us. And I just want to make one last comment. I mentioned last week, and with the chief being here, I'd like to mention it again, that it's the hearts and minds of people that we need to talk, and as the chief mentioned, converse with one another. We can't legislate common sense. We can't legislate good behavior. You can enforce to a degree, but and some people, that unfortunately is the route that needs to be taken. But the vast majority of us, it's about talking and being open with one another. We're fortunate to live in a county that it's small enough. We know one another, and we talk. And fortunately, the kind of events we've seen in other areas, we haven't seen here. And a lot of it's because of the people. It's because of the police that we have in our communities, that are in touch with our communities, that helps that or makes that happen. So with that being said, I'd like to wish everybody a good afternoon, be safe, and bye for now.